Morning, colleagues. Let me just grab this. Okay, it's a messy and tough process to figure out which technologies will support effective teaching and learning, and that we have found out over the last 15 years, as you will see in my presentation. There was a really interesting article recently in EduCourse that summarized the highlights of the last 20 years, and so we can probably debate what these, you may not agree with what they've highlighted. But I think the main point that they've made in that article that you all will agree with is that in 2002, OERs were the rage, and everybody thought that's going to be the future. You looked at 2003, and everyone thought blogs are going to take over. This was an interesting time when we thought everyone is going to now use virtual worlds, and Second Life took over. People designed entire courses around Second Life. E-portfolios, even MOOCs, we talked about that yesterday, open textbooks, okay, blockchain now, and digital badges. But what the lesson is out of all of this, most of these things were a flash in the pan, and we struggled to scale them. And that is a really important issue. I tried to just look at what UJ have done over the last 15 years. So obviously we're trailing behind, but we have been as a university quite innovative in trying out some of these new things. I want to highlight a few things. So in 2003, before we became the University of Johannesburg, we were, if you remember, we were 3 institutions that were merged. There was a really big attempt to give students learning material, basically in the form of a CD. So it was a study guide and then a CD with a lot of study material that included, in fact, for many people, not just PowerPoint presentations, but also videos. It was a really early attempt to support students. We have a very, very long tradition at the University of Johannesburg of a tutorial system. So we've overhauled that over the years, but tutors play a really important role. What is really important here at what we're doing is in 2013, we decided that all students need to have some sort of a device when they come to university. It could be a smartphone or a laptop or an iPad. So we thought, like everyone else in the world, that the iPad will actually take the place of the laptop. Now that didn't happen. It didn't happen here, but it also didn't happen elsewhere. What we then also did was I need to point out, we started a project that we're continuing with, is where we supply our poorest students with a device. So it started small with 2,000 iPads, mini iPads, and this year, we switched to a 2-in-1 device with a hard keyboard, and now we support 4,000 of our poorest students. We also have a huge project at the university to give students free e-textbooks. And so we are focusing those. We used to focus it on first years, but now we focus it on modules where students need additional resources or additional help, and we have called those it's an entire project around priority modules for student success. At the moment, we are at the point where we're trying out all kinds of software, hardware around AI. It's hard to keep up with your infrastructure and with all the software, the resources supporting students, because it's very expensive. It's not just costly in terms of physical money, but the people that you have to employ. We have Wi-Fi. Students get free Wi-Fi. Most universities in South Africa, students pay for their Wi-Fi. We also have a project in Johannesburg where all citizens get a number of megabytes per day. And if you drive around in Johannesburg, you sometimes wonder why people stand with their phones and their hands through some of the security fences. But it's actually to access the free Wi-Fi, and it is free for people. We have a wonderful set of libraries on each of our campuses, and there we've designed spaces, for research commons, social spaces. Students have access to computers and unlimited internet use. There's also help desks that we have around our campuses. Now, we're trying out all kinds of new ways, and this is really important. And I'll make some conclusions later on. We have a project around applications. So one of the things we want to do is to support our students to be able to study offline when they're not in campus. The Deputy Minister mentioned how expensive data is. And data, I think, is a really big issue in South Africa. Actually, many of our neighbors, if you travel to Namibia or to Botswana, see how incredibly cheap data is compared to South Africa. And that is one thing we are actually trying to sort out, but it's a slow process. We have now several chatbots that we are using on campus to support students. 3D printing. We have a wonderful example of chemistry where students had to buy kits for 300 Rand to practice different configurations of molecules. And the department is now printing the very same package for 25 Rand. And that is a very good example of what you can do with technology to actually, that's not very expensive technology, to support students. Our mining engineers has a custom-made virtual reality set, and they train their students as blasters. So you have your visor on, you draw the place that you in the mine is going to blast, and the student then practice on there and gets marked immediately. And I think that's a great example of something that's actually working. Some people have just mentioned this, but so next year we have a free module to introduce our students, particularly our non-expert students. What are we talking about when we talk about AI and automation? And we hope that students will really enjoy that course as a first free course where they will receive a badge or a certification at the end. We're also going to have our first common read, very common in other parts of the world, where particularly first years, but also other students read the same book. And we've chosen a book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, because those of you who've read the book will know you can do all kinds of things with that book. And we hope that students may enjoy that. Here's an example of an app that we promote for new students, prospective students and new students to UJ. So what they can do when they download the app is they can actually take a virtual tour on all of our campuses. So they can use their phones to look around and see, for example, what the Soweto campus looks like, or what this campus looks like. And I think that is quite a nice innovation. We also worked with just augmented reality that's a bit gimmicky, but first year students really like these things. So they all got a little sticker on the back of their student cards, and when they download the app and point at it, this paw appears and they can get all kinds of help. And so that was successful. Okay, so what have we learned? What have we learned internationally, and what have we learned here in UJ? I think there are many lessons. The thing that you all probably know is our initial reaction is always one of great optimism. You know, the new software or the new design or the new app is all good, and it's going to solve the problem. It's the best solution. And I think we're often a bit over-optimistic because many of these things fizzle out. It's very hard to scale. Many of these things are expensive. There's uncertainty or lack of experience of how you embed it into your module, or what kind of pedagogy should you use with it. Often lack of skills. It stays as an add-on, gimmicky. We struggle with low digital literacy. We talked about that yesterday. not just the students, but also the staff. So things change constantly, and I think that stays a challenge for all of us. And when it's a top-down initiative, when managers decide this is something we really need to have, you often find resistance. There's a forthcoming article from UCT where they looked at blended learning. And when we had a crisis a few years ago with students in the movement Fees Must Fall or Roads Must Fall, and UCT decided top-down to implement blended learning. And what they found afterwards is that it actually did more harm than good in the long run. That article should be out in the next few months. The usefulness is frequently of all of these software, the different apps and so on, is often not supported by scholarship of teaching and learning, but actually by industry research. You know, wonderful, beautiful, glossy infographics, claims of success. And I want to point out two things. Earlier this year, I went to the UNESCO Mobile Learning Week in France. And it was so clear to all of us that you couldn't really figure out what was an academic piece that was presented and what was an industry piece. And so the lines of research and evidence was completely blurred. Many of us read education blogs, and particularly edutech blogs, when you often look at who the editor is or who the writer is, the person frequently has a link with the industry. And so you are not really getting like a clear-headed view of whether that new technology is something that we need or that would be really helpful. There's a tendency to say that technology will solve our problems. If you can just add another thing. We want to roll out videos to our students and some live videos, repeating classes in other campuses. And there's like great technology that we haven't tested that actually can track whether your students pay attention to that video or not. The question is, do we really need that? Is that now another must-have? Well, when you listen to the research from the designers, you really need that. But I think we often need to step back a little bit, pilot what we do, and scale up, and not buy the entire thing. We need clear practice documents, good examples, and I really think that when we employ educational technologies, we need to make sure that it is linked to our institution's bigger strategy and not just an add-on or an ad hoc solution for a problem. I thought this was a great summary. So we had EdTech 1. We all looked at the shiny stuff and were very impressed. EdTech 2, we had the stuff now. We thought, what can we do with it? And we tried out all kinds of stuff. EdTech 3 is now, what do we need to do? What should we be doing with the shiny stuff? Not what can we do, but what should we be doing? It's very hard to predict the future. If you follow the Horizon reports, that's really made up of predictions from us, so you can participate in their big surveys annually. This year's was interesting because they've also now started to critique themselves. Anyway, what you have in front of you, many of you have probably already looked at that, is what we're busy doing now, the next 2 to 3 years, and then the next 4 to 5 years. I think most of us are already there. Mixed reality and artificial intelligence, I'm going to give you an example now. We're thinking about blockchain and virtual assistants. There's a lot of hype, but there's low evidence. So what we've done recently, and we're still busy with that, is to try and look what evidence is there for adopting augmented reality, mixed reality, and or virtual reality. That whole bunch is called extended reality. Do we have evidence that it actually enhances learning? And I have to say that when you look at the literature, the evidence is not all there yet. So there's some systematic reviews where there were particularly case control studies. We focused on, we found most evidence was for education and health sciences. There's some evidence that when you employ virtual reality, augmented reality, that it's good supplementation, but like the learning management systems, people tend to dump the information, and there's not a good design, and so there's really problems with the pedagogy around both AR and VR. It often promotes distraction, and some of the studies at universities and in K-12 schools in America, there was evidence of a cognitive load, overload. There's also, it's not clear how these learning experiences really take place, what is happening when you use that. We know you immerse yourself, but what is really happening? VR are used to increase intrinsic motivation in students in a narrow range of design factors, and actually that's one of the pieces of evidence that we do have of help. However, it's costly. You need space, particularly for virtual reality. Digital literacy is not always there. We embrace these things, but it's not that easy to integrate it into the mainstream it. It's not a solution by itself, so you need to integrate it in the learning paths of students, and we definitely underestimate the time that it needs to prepare and to embed these new technologies. There's a danger that is not just information dumping, but that there's another version of the stage on the stage. So in some of the studies, they found that students find it incredibly isolating because it's just you, particularly when you have the headset on. And that's something that you can overcome when you use mixed reality. That's a different kind of blending. And of course, technology is not neutral. We talked about that. It's usually made by young men for the rest of us. And so we have to get more women involved. Their gender issues, their racial issues, their class issues. And that's something that we don't always take into account when we look at something new. Okay, so what can we conclude from this? I think I have three key things. The one is the procurement, the implementation, and the evaluation. So you really need good examples, because otherwise people don't know what to do with this stuff. Good examples and good practices. The most expensive things are not necessarily necessary. You can do a whole lot of edutech activities with things that are not that expensive. It's a rich area of research, but we seldom track when we implement. And I think that is really important, to track and to evaluate. Pilots are helpful. An interesting thing that I've noticed when we have to listen to sales talks every 2 or 3 weeks, and many of the companies are trying to sell you surveillance systems under the guise of teaching and learning systems. So when we need a system for security, they actually start out by saying, this is a great thing to see who's in class. You can actually lock all of your lecture halls. You can completely control your entire use it for your smart campus, who goes into the classroom, who goes out of the classroom. But actually the system is not designed for that. A few last things, I'm almost done. I think 2 last things is that universities need to develop their own expertise to understand these digital and educational technologies. But at the moment, we really rely on non-education people to tell us what we can do and what we should be doing with it. UJ is developing an expert group, and I think that is really important, so that you sit in a group with different kinds of expertise, including people with a teaching and learning experience, and then make a decision. Again, then finally, I think universities really risk to become platforms for large companies unless we wrestle back some control of education technologies. And I think that is a really big priority that we all need to think about. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to welcome Prof. Gregor, Kennedy from the University of Melbourne, to come forth as well. And then we're going to hopefully have a little bit of time for a question and answer session as well after this presentation.
Say it again. Yeah, yeah. No worries. I'll try and race through.
We've got another. Oh, here it is.
Beautiful. Actually, it's mostly stand here. Okay. Now, firstly, apologies for the voice. I've got a cold. I blame my daughter, but hopefully we'll get through. The second thing is apologies for the title. I don't know what I was thinking when I created this title, because it's sort of somewhat patronising. But bear with me and we'll change the title by the end of the talk. I'm going to race through the first half of this talk. It's a little bit of a different talk from the ones that maybe we've heard, and the way that to maybe position this is to think of it as the work that has been, the excellent work that was done at Edinburgh that Sian was talking about yesterday. This is a much more sort of practical follow-on from that kind of thing. So I'm going to rip through the first half of this and spend more time on the second half, given we've got a little bit limited time. So the fourth industrial revolution is the focus of the symposium over the next over the 2.5 days. I'm taking a particular slice of this, which is really looking at the jobs bit of it. There's quite a bit that we could look at, and many of the speakers, the introduction from the Vice-Chancellor, the Deputy Minister and others have gone through this list of the things that might characterise the fourth industrial revolution. I'm not going to do any justice to the term. I'm just going to pass by this and presume that you know what we're talking about. For me, though, these are the main three things that focus my mind: artificial intelligence, digital technologies and networks, and robotics and automation. So I think that the intersection of those three things are, for me, some of the challenging questions come out for us as educational institutions. As I said, I'm going to talk mostly about jobs, and this is the narrative that you would often see about the fourth industrial revolution. This one from the BBC and the Office of National Statistics in the UK, and that automation will replace 1.5 million jobs. And a couple of our speakers have touched on that today. And you don't have to search too far to look at what those kind of categories are jobs and the likelihood that those jobs will be replaced by some sort of sense of automation. You don't want to be in food preparation. You do want to be in our industry, in education, which is down the bottom of the pack there. This is from the OECD and reprinted by The Economist. In addition to the automation and the replacement of jobs, a part of this narrative is certainly we don't know what the jobs of the future are going to be. And this is, you can't quite read it, but global systems architect, manager of plant and career coach. These jobs that are fusions of jobs, I find these quite amusing actually, and if you can get the slides later on, I'm sure you will as well, that it's really the unknown future and people really grasping for ideas about what kind of future employability will look like. And so part of the narrative is a displacement of jobs. Another part of the narrative is we simply don't know what jobs are going to exist. So the first question to pose to you is, how do we educate for an unknown future where even if you knew what the job market was, the chances are that a robot would outperform you in the interview? That's our first question. But I want to say that I think that there's another narrative that is going alongside the fourth industrial revolution and employability narrative, which is more about a core university narrative. And hopefully this will resonate with some of you in the sectors in your countries. And I think the narrative has risen up. It's a narrative that comes and goes if you've worked in universities, as many of us have for a long time. It comes and goes. But it really is a narrative about what the university's purpose is, what the university is for, and what the value of a university education is. And I think the Ivory Tower video really characterised this for me in the North American context, with the rising fees and questions about why students are actually going to university. When I posed this question a long time ago to Simon Marginson, some of you will know, a leading higher education researcher, his comment is mind, money and marriage. And this is the catch cry of what university is for. You go there to develop the individual and the intellectual capability and the broadening of the mind. You go there to get a job, so you can get a good job, so you can get some money. And you go there to meet your future partner in the social mobility and also procreation stakes. Just before I move on, I think that we're at danger of restricting our conversation about the fourth industrial revolution to the employment, the money bit of this. I think we've got to challenge ourselves over the next couple of days to make sure that we're not so much maybe the marriage bit, but there is a social aspect to this and also a partnership aspect in a business sense, but the mind bit of the university, we want to make sure that we don't lose that, even though, as I'm saying, my conversation or my talk today is focused very much on the employability money aspect. So in the last 10 years, my argument is that the narrative about employability has really grown, certainly in Australia, and I noticed in other parts of the world. When I was giving a talk in the Midlands in the UK a couple of years ago, this was the advertisement on the station platform. And what it says is, we do all these things, class size is small, everyone gets a chance to contribute, which is just one of the reasons why an impressive 95% of our graduates are in work. So it's a very explicit call to students and prospective students that this university, if you come to it, you're going to get a job. England's #1 university for employability, says Northampton. So in the rhetoric, in the advertisements, in the argument, and I was just speaking with Joanne this morning, the performance contingent funding framework brought into the Australian higher education context in the coming years, the Minister announced that there's 4 criteria on which to judge this. The universities will be judged. One of those is employment outcomes, and it's worth 40%, so it's bigger than the other 3 are worth 60%. You do the math, because I can't do it. The other aspect about employability is this, which has already been mentioned in our conversations, which is the idea, similar to, turns back to the fourth industrial revolution argument, is that there is quite a transitory nature in employability, is that people will have job mobility over their careers, the idea that you'd go to university, train or be educated in a discipline and hold that job for the rest of your working life is seemingly gone. You'll have 5 careers and 17 jobs. So the second narrative is that, sort of running alongside the fourth industrial revolution narrative, is how can we make a university more vocational to ensure students get a job and another job after that. And so together these two narratives are somewhat, not exactly competing, but they are somewhat oxymoronic in some ways. And I want to unpack that a little bit. So the main part of the talk, not main part, but what I want to reflect on in the last part of the talk is really get down to some pragmatics about what that means for curriculum, for teaching, learning and assessment, and for pedagogical practice. And the way I want to frame that is to talk about 6 areas and really just have some reflections. These are sort of things that I think about a bit, but it's really some provocations and reflections on those 6 areas. And I'm at pains to point out that these are overlapping. They're not mutually exclusive at all. In fact, they're sometimes really deeply connected, but it's useful for me to unpack them one by one. So the first one is syllabus, and by this I really just mean content. What are we actually going to put in front of students? This is very pragmatic, this is very practical, this is very me just thinking about the ways in which universities strategically might need to position themselves in the context of those 2 narratives in the fourth industrial revolution. What degrees will be needed? What programs will we need to offer? Well, I think that we'll still need professional degrees in many areas. We'll still need health professionals, we'll still need teachers, we'll still need engineers, and they'll need to be accredited, and they all need to be the focus of degrees of education. Some degrees will inevitably go as jobs evaporate in that area as part of the fourth industrial revolution. Arguably, I would put to you, if you've worked in faculty creating curriculum, this has always been the case. We always adapt and change our programs. It might just be that it accelerates a little bit. And so universities will need to maybe more frequently update their degree offer to students. And I think that they'll need to respond quite quickly to areas of growth. And I think the two examples up there of analytics and data science, we've seen the number of programs that have proliferated across the world in data science and analytics over the last 5 years is really a characteristic of a response and a more agile response to specific employment areas. And the last point is Rumsfeldian programs, as I call them, the unknowns. I don't know if people remember Donald Rumsfeld, but the great unknown unknowns, they're tricky. We can't really predict those kind of things. And I think that we've just got to live with that. The second aspect of syllabus is the content. It's really what is taught in the programs. And I think that there's an inevitability that we'll need to update so-called old disciplined knowledge with new knowledge. And I was really struck by Kathy, who unfortunately can't be with us, who leads this cluster, about thinking about the way in which the fourth industrial revolution is going to disrupt professions and professional practice, whatever they be, and the way in which universities will need to respond about what is required within disciplines in order to educate people for not exactly a new career, but new things in career. So if you think about how the way technology is used in the health professions is a classic example of the ways in which jobs change. And the second big area of content has been touched on already, which is 21st skills development. And I think this is going to become increasingly important in our programs. I think the main point here is that universities who are not probably well known for their agility and their responsiveness will need to respond more quickly, and there will be more pressure on. Second area is pedagogical practice. And the first thing, I don't know if this is controversial or not, the question of how we will teach, learn and assess. And in many ways, I think this, consistent with the Deputy Minister this morning, will be a bit of an evolution rather than a revolution. I think in many ways things will stay largely unchanged, because how we're governed and how we're constrained will, by tradition, by academic workforce, by regulations, by the scale of our institutions, by the physical infrastructure that we have, I think that things will be slow to evolve in many ways, shapes and forms. But how more specifically to think about teaching, learning and assessment for employability in that unknown future that I characterised at the start? And I think there's three areas that we'll see arise in 21st century skills, the application of knowledge to authentic and diverse contexts, and industry engagement in our programs. It's important to recognise that you're already doing all of this. This is not new, but I think that it's just going to get a little bit more heat. There's going to be a little bit more pressure to show this. So when you're talking about 21st century skills, these are the kind of things that I think of. These are from the World Economic Forum. Foundational literacies on the left, competencies in the middle, and the kind of things that people talk about in terms of those characters or qualities, the things like agility and adaptability and persistence and grit and things like that. I want to give you two examples of how at Melbourne University we're doing this. So the first one is sort of in the foundational literacies. We introduced the idea of employment fundamentals into our program. So every student of the university has access to a free 4x4 week online course. And there's 5 of them. One's in data fundamentals, finance fundamentals, professional communication fundamentals, legal fundamentals, and entrepreneurship fundamentals. And students can do these alongside their bachelor's program. We've seen very strong uptake of these things, these online modules that students do as a cohort since we've released them. Many other universities are doing these kind of things. But this is a direct response to the idea of 21st century skills. The second two, these two areas are really captured by, again, things that you would be doing I developed for the university what was called the Melbourne Practice and Partnership Framework, which is effectively an experiential or work-integrated learning framework. We're just about to roll out a strategic roadmap associated with this. But you will see here what we've defined as 4 domains within university curricula that we're going to fund and support and strategically invest in. The first 2 are more discovery projects. One is led by the university staff, the other is led by partners. Authentic practice activities is a suite of activities which are much more applied, practical, authentic activities that are often done in teams that can be embedded in curricula. And this, which is often what people think of when they think of work-integrated learning, is just one of 4 areas in which we're trying to encourage staff to get involved in, which is the classic partner placement where you send somebody out. I think these are just examples of those 2 things that I think are seen on the rise. The way in which we have to embed these in curriculum starts to become not exactly a problem, but sometimes a challenge. I think that what we'll see more of, we're already seeing this, and this is my 3rd of 6, is changes in curriculum structure. What's dropped off the bottom of the slide here is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So just think that there's a week. So this is 12 weeks of a semester and days of the week. This is a classic 3+1 curriculum, 3 lectures, 1 tutorial. Is that making sense? I don't know if yeah. So what I think we'll see is that we're going to have to start thinking about the ways in which we disrupt that curriculum structure in pretty fundamental ways. How many people think that the lecturers in mathematics or anatomy or history are going to say, yeah, take 9 of my lectures, it's all going to be fine? So this is challenging for us. Joanne and I were talking about this on the bus. It's challenging to have this cultural change. And it's much more challenge when you do something like that, where you say, all right, we're going to do an intensive bit at the start. We're going to do some work-integrated learning or experiential learning. You'll have a few back to base, and then we'll do an intensive at the end. I think in order to accommodate the things that we want to do in response to the 4th Industrial Revolution will require fairly significant curriculum change. 4th out of 6 is really just a bugbear of mine. I think we often think of students as one thing in universities. We clearly don't have that. I think that we often think of a generalist undergraduate student in our mind when we think about this. Much of the talk that I've given thus far has got that in mind. We also have programs which are not generalist programs. We have professional entry programs. At our university, they're mostly graduate in health sciences or teaching or engineering, but they might be undergraduate. Then we have specialist coursework programs. If you want to do a Masters of Leadership, you're already a teacher, but you want to go back and do something specialist, or a graduate certificate in oncology care because you want to better yourself. And that feeds into post-professional education and continuing professional development. I think it's increasingly important for universities to try and demarcate between these types of students, because what they need will be different in relationship to the other things that I've spoken about. The 5th area is delivery models, and the next 2 are sort of deeply entwined. Traditionally the university, when it was an elite system, would take people of a certain age, typically from school. You'd go to university for your 3-year program or whatever it is, and then you'd go out and you'd go work in industry and you'd get a job. This is the model. So I think what we're going to see is that people are going to go out to industry, and then as the uncertain employment future confronts us, there's going to have to be pathways out from industry, from wherever people are, back into the university. And there's going to be a range of things that individuals who are working in industry might do in order to advance their career or change their career or update their skills. It could be our university, it could be another university, it could be an online program through LinkedIn, and it could be somewhere locally, or it could be anywhere in the world with the internet. You've heard of the internet. And so what that means is that universities are going to have to become a little bit more savvy, and we're already seeing this, of course, and a little bit more entrepreneurial in the way in which they attract and retain those kind of individuals who are increasingly going to be wanting to do small modules of learning. And University of Melbourne can offer those modules, and this builds into the stackability of those modules into a university award program. So this is the stackability model, which I think is going to become ever prevalent. The tricky thing, and I think that something that we've got to discuss in our groups, is that the people that are offering those modules are not going to be us some of the time. They're going to be another university. UQ is going to do something great, and it's going to be online. And I'm going to say, fine, my graduate certificate in oncology, if you do that course, I'm happy to stack it into my master's program. But more challenging is industry is going to be playing in this space. IBM, LinkedIn, pick your flavour. And that's going to be, and we're going to think about the way in which we stack those into our courses. And that's going to be challenging for us. And that leads to the final bit, which is the recognition bit. I mentioned this in a question, I think, to Rory yesterday. So the orange bit here this is an overview of our micro-credentialing framework. The orange bit, if they're orange to you, is that stackability. People come through an award course, then they want some CPD, and if they do that, it may stack into another award course of the institution. But those employment fundamentals and those work-integrated learning programs that students are doing may be embedded within an award course, and students might also want recognition for that. So they don't just get a BA, they also have something that they can go to an employer and say, no, I know something about forklift truck driving or food handling or whatever it is. And equally, there might be things that the university is increasingly asked to provide alongside curriculum that are also micro-credentialed. And I think that the university has to be a little bit more sophisticated in its thinking about this. And hopefully we are doing that. Two narratives. Returning to the two narratives. And returning to the title. So I think that really what I was trying to say in the title in a ham-fisted way when I wrote the abstract in 20 minutes and shoved it off online is that there are really quite fundamental and existential kind of choices for universities here. What kind of university you want to be will depend really on your strategic response to some of those questions that I've posed in terms of curriculum, in terms of teaching, learning and assessment. And these are challenging questions. It's my last slide. Two oxymoronic narratives. I don't know if it is an oxymoron. Let's talk about that. It's not really, I don't reckon. Educating for an unknown employment future while at the time educating for employability. There'll still be a need to educate for professions and accredited professions and a discipline based, and the degree will not disappear anytime soon. The structure of teaching and learning will tilt towards applied and authentic and those 21st century skills, and probably necessarily because of curriculum crunch, move away from teaching the canon curriculum, the discipline-based bodies. That is going to be existential crisis for many of our academics. Demarcating different students' audiences, and importantly, the different offer we make to them will become increasingly important. Students will look for those modular activities within, alongside and outside curriculum. And that will lead to really the 60-year curriculum. Lifelong learning will become a thing, I think, and it's been said for a long time. And as a result, universities will need to accommodate new pathways for students, particularly post-professional students who have already got an award and kind of come back to the university. And that will mean that this new ecosystem of micro-credentialing, a new credentialing ecosystem, not just micro, will emerge. If you give me one more minute, I want to pose a final question, partly as a piss take, but also partly because I think it's sort of something to think about. If you think about those two narratives, in the future, when routine thinking and action are offloaded to robots, what undergraduate degree do you think universities can continue to confidently offer that will continue to be viable, will continue to be attractive? Anyone want to say? And not you, Kate.
History.
Exactly right. The Bachelor of Arts, there's this really odd thing. The Bachelor of Arts is a program, or it could be design or it could be science, develops students' knowledge, skills and ability when designed well, that both the universities want in that mind bit of the equation, But employers deeply desire, in terms of the skills bit, creativity, agility, critical thinking, problem solving, ability to work in teams when you design it right, communication and intercultural awareness. These are all the things that are on the right-hand side of that chart. So that's an interesting thing when we're starting to talk about the functional approaches to employability. I'll leave it there.